Mm. Everyone can see it, right? Yeah, so what you've learned about today is how our memories are formed in the brain and about memory engrams. And one of the, or we have a lot of ways of looking at memories in animals and study them. But one of the most used ones are contextual fair conditioning, which is a task where the mice is creating an association between a foot shock and the context they are in when they are receiving this foot shock. And this protocol consists of three sessions. In the first one, which is the acquisition session, the mice are put into a context and are left to be exploring freely for 3 minutes before they are receiving a foot shock. And after a 30-second delay, they are receiving a second foot shock, and this is repeating itself until the mouse has received 5 foot shocks. And to test if the mouse has created a memory or created an association between the shock and the context, the mouse is put back into the same environment the day after for a recall session, where it's allowed to freely move around in the environment for 5 minutes. And to test if, or to see if the mouse is remembering this foot shock that it received in the acquisition session, we're looking at the fear response of the mouse, which is a behavior that we call freezing, where the mouse is standing completely still. And you will see very shortly a movie of this. And what we can see from when plotting the amount of freezing in a session, then a mouse that is not that has not received any foot shocks in the acquisition session will not freeze in response to any of the contexts. Whereas a mouse that has received a foot shock will freeze when put back into this environment that it was foot shocked in the acquisition session. And as Flavio mentioned, this memory is quite specific to the environment that it received the foot shock in. So which we can see by putting the animal into a new context, which we call context B, where you can see that the amount of freezing is reduced compared to context A. And similar to the Morris-Water maze task, we are analyzing this behavior in eToVision. So similar to what you saw yesterday, we need to define the arena that the mouse is located in. And in this case, we are defining the arena slightly bigger than the floor of the context, because the mice sometimes rear up on the walls or like climb up on the walls. And you also need to have a precise tracking of the animal in the context. And Maria showed you yesterday how to do set up this for pre-recorded videos, but she also mentioned that we can do this for live videos. And the advantage of doing it for the live videos is that we can also control the hardware, like the physical properties of the context during the session. So in the acquisition session, the trial control settings looks like this. So in the beginning of the session, we turn on the lights and we set the time interval to let the mice freely explore for 3 minutes before we start this foot shock routine, in which we give them a foot shock, let it last for 1 second before terminating it. And this rule is repeated 5 times before the session is ended. The recall session is much simpler. You just put the mouse into the environment and the lights are turned on at the very beginning, and you let it explore for 5 minutes. And here is a video of a mouse during the acquisition session. So you can see that when the mouse is receiving a foot shock, it will jump around very briefly. So that was the foot shock. And now that the tracking dot was red, that was when the mouse was freezing. But we will take a closer look at this now, because it's very important to know the behavior of the animal that you're analyzing or using in the experiment. Because if we compare, if you look at the normal behavior of the mouse, you can see that it's walking, I would say, quite casually around, but sometimes it stops. But we are not defining this as freezing because the mouse is, for example, sniffing the ground, it's moving its head around. And this difference becomes very obvious when you compare it to what is actually freezing. So in the beginning of this right movie, you can see in the beginning it's moving its head, so it's not freezing. But now it kind of looks like the screen has frozen because the mouse is standing completely still. And now it stopped freezing. So the way that you define your analysis parameters is very important, so that what you, based on your analysis, is defining as freezing is what is actually what the mouse is doing at the time. So to just go for this again, one of the ways that you would initially think is a good way of detecting freezing is tracking the center point of the mouse, because it would make sense if the mouse is standing still, it means that it's freezing. But as you saw from the previous movie, when the mouse is standing still, it can still move its head. So we have another way of detecting freezing, which is looking at the pixel change, which means which is the degree of change of the pixels that is tracking the mouse from frame to frame in the video. So if the mouse is standing still, but moving its head, you would see a larger deflection of or you would see a large change in the pixel change here. But when it's standing completely still, which is the freezing behavior, the pixel change would be minimal. So yeah, this is what we use in our experiment, and this is what we define as the accurate method. So this is all you would need to know before starting your practical exercise. You will analyze data from 2 mice that have been tested with this protocol. So you receive an Excel file with the output, and we have put in 3 different output measures from eToVision that you can plot. Is there any questions to this? There's no one, Slido?
No, nothing. So I guess we can just part at this time. You will